world is changing fast. New technologies are impacting how we think about products, services, and the way we live our lives. Nowhere is this trend more present than in financial services, where new business models and customer expectations are changing our conceptions about banking, finance, and the very nature of money. Welcome to Rebank, a visionary podcast about banking, fintech, and the future. The future of banking is here. Hello and welcome to Rebank. I'm your host, Will Beeson. Should people outside fintech care about fintech? Today we're joined by Brad Goodall, a serial entrepreneur and founder of Rebank, to discuss. Open banking was hands down one of the most relevant themes in 2018, with legislation taking effect in Europe and the UK and being replicated and expanded in countries like Australia. But so far, we've seen anything but tangible impacts. We haven't really seen products, services, or new customer experiences. Why? To start with, banks drag their feet in terms of implementation, and startups have been unable to deliver cross-platform experiences they imagined. We've also taken a narrow view of what open banking means and how it will be leveraged. This is where Brad comes in. Brad brings a richer perspective to open banking and sees it as an opportunity for much of banking to shift away from traditional financial services providers and over to consumer brands more relevant to customers. In this conversation, Brad helps us think about how much fintech actually matters to people outside fintech and whether the industry is getting excited about the right things. Do you have a view? Join the conversation on Twitter, LinkedIn, or on our website at bankingthefuture.com. If you like today's episode, please take 30 seconds to rate us on iTunes and share us with a friend. Thank you very much for joining us today. Please welcome Brad Goodall. Brad Goodall, welcome to Rebank.
Thank you very much.
So it's good to connect. I guess the last time we caught up was probably over the summer, and you have made tremendous progress since then on your new venture, which we'll definitely get into. Just to kind of set the scene and provide a bit of context, we were kicking ideas around before we started recording, and thought it might be fun to explore the question of, does fintech matter to people who aren't in fintech?
Yeah, for sure.
Because I think there's definitely like a bit of certainly egotism, but it's kind of like this obsession with this kind of bubble that we live in, and how fintech is changing the world, and it's tons of passionate people looking to do great things, challenging the ways that banking has traditionally worked, or credit has traditionally worked, or data architectures within financial services have traditionally worked. But it is admittedly easy to quickly kind of lose track of what the actual customer impact is, and indeed what the average customer actually wants banking or finance to be. And in all likelihood, actually, the customer doesn't want banking or finance at all. They just want to go about living their life. Maybe for context and so people have a sense of the perspective that you bring to this topic, and I think you have a very relevant experience here. You can just kind of run through past few years, what you've been up to, and
Sure.
how you kind of come to this world.
Sure, yeah. So thanks very much for having me on the podcast. I think it's a really interesting topic, and I think 2018 certainly been a really big year for fintech and banking. So a little bit quickly about me. Originally from Australia, I was always in finance and technology. I just didn't call it fintech until I arrived in London in 2014. I was very lucky to arrive in London, I think, right at the sort of boom time of when fintech had really kind of kicked off. I think 2012, 2013 was when it's starting to mobilize. I think 2014 has really exploded. I was lucky also to be involved at Level 39 and saw some amazing companies there. Revolut was one of the companies that was at Level 39. eToro was there, and built a really interesting network of people that I was able to, I guess, rely on to help me to navigate the waters of both the UK and also what was the fintech and banking scene. I've been involved in starting a business with an ex-CEO from a major bank.
We had Anthony on the podcast.
You did, that's right. Yeah, so 10x Future Technology. So I was involved in co-founding that, and then this year started a company called Banked, which is really focused in the open banking space, open data space, the aggregation market, and I guess we're looking to play a role in the infrastructure of open data, and banking is a really good starting point, because there's been some, and especially banking in the UK is a really good starting point, because there's been some amazing work already done here.
Yeah. So maybe best place to kind of dig into this is starting with kind of the premise of Banked. So we've heard tons about open banking, and we've largely seen very little. People have some interesting ideas. Most of it is kind of relatively dull, I think. Where do you see the opportunity with Banked in this new open data world?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the comments you made at the start about what do customers actually see. In my view, open banking is looking to serve a problem that is around competition, and I think that's where the banking community, the finance community, the regulator, that's where it's all come from, and competition is good for the customer. Competition can be difficult to navigate for customers, so there will be lots of services that spring up to help them with that. I think it's also coming at a point in time where data and getting into a new wave of the internet and the way that data-driven companies are being built. And I think it's come at essentially at an inflection point. So I don't think it's as much about banking as potentially everybody is talking about it in the banking and the fintech world. And that's probably, it's a very good starting point, and it's very good because we're getting standards, but I actually think it's very much covers lots of topics, things like GDPR and the consumer's right to their own data, and the way in which data will be served to build products and services online in the future. Yeah,
so I think you're spot on in that. We've kind of for the past whatever year or so been referring to open banking, to PSD2, this European directive, and thinking specifically about what the competitive impact is going to be for a large bank that's traditionally owned a customer's transaction history, and now whatever needs to share it. But that's really not the point, is it? Looking forward, it's like I don't know. It's like saying that I don't know, the internet was a way to for people to kind of access like a shared file system or something. Like maybe it was just an early use case, but it just opens up and I think transforms not even just the financial services industry. And I think this is your premise with Banked, but that leading with banking data really just kind of provides the stitching required to create massive new data-driven industries across sectors, across current verticals.
Absolutely, and I think that's a really important point, is that brand has as much to play a role in all of this as does technology. So financial services is one of those industries that plays one of the most important roles in any person's life, and there are some people that are very fortunate to completely understand the financial world and navigate it very well. There are other people that aren't as fortunate, and there's financially illiterate, there's the unbanked. But what we know is that when companies, people, brands can help individuals with maintaining their financial life, their well-being, and they can help them to make smart decisions that give them dignity and important things that we need to live our life, that creates an alignment with the brand. And then I think in this future world where we have so much of our data online, what I think it will do is it will give the brand the right to ask for more data. So I think currently you provide your data to a social media company, you provided your data to a finance company, you provided your data to a fitness company. I think financial services is a really interesting one to start with, where you're building a relationship with a customer, helping them with their financial services, and then being able to skip across to health. And equally vice versa, I can see how a transport company could help you with your budgeting for transport, and then all of a sudden they are starting to understand a little bit more about your financial wellness and help you with that, which then gives them the right to look at other areas of your data. So I think that's an interesting way to look at it, as opposed to open banking is about shopping around for a mortgage or a credit card. I think it's much broader than that.
So it's, I guess a lot of the conversation early on was that incumbent banks were going to have difficulty maintaining customer relationships because these like third-party data processors were going to kind of step in and create interfaces that are more customer friendly, and we're just going to access the data from the banks. But fundamentally, it was just going to be a reshuffling of who has direct customer access versus who runs the back end within the financial services vertical. But what you're saying is that potentially this kind of opens things up to non-banks, non-financial institutions who are already present in people's lives in other ways, kind of stepping in and expanding their proposition.
That's right. I do think a very important point to make in that, though, is that this is also all about trust. And the one thing that banks have got that can sometimes be misunderstood is that they do have consumer trust. There might be certain banks, and certainly in 2008, 2009, we identified that we didn't have the average consumer, or many consumers didn't have the same values as a bank. We started to see that there were some things that banks were doing around the globe that we were exposed publicly, and we saw that actually the values that I have are not shared with this particular brand that I bank with. But I don't think that meant that we took our money out of the bank and put it under the bed, because we trusted the bank to hold the money. We trusted the bank that they have a relationship with the government, and that the government and the regulator will keep our money safe. And certainly in some countries that wasn't the case, but certainly in the UK it was. And I think that means that I don't believe that Amazon and Facebook are going to swoop in and get access to your salary information and spending data. That's not my position. Is not that a brand like that will simply eat the bank's lunch. I think there are certain things that it can do around providing different services that have financial services ingrained. But I actually think the banks have got a hugely important role to play in that trust cycle. And I think the very smart banks will be the ones that find ways to open up and do partnerships and create ecosystems where they sit in the center, really owning that trust space. And equally, I think the smart brands will not try and take them on and say, well, we're going to steal, we're going to take your data and we're going to take your customer relationship. They will instead see them as an important partner in the customer trust cycle. I think the one really interesting thing about open banking is that what it's done is it's meant that you can keep your current account with your existing provider that you've banked with for years and years, and that your parents might have banked with, and even your grandparents might have banked with. You can have the security of your salary going in there and your everyday spending coming from there. But what you can do is you can then share that information with trusted providers, and share that information in ways where you don't have to share all of the information. I think at the moment, open banking feels a little bit like a fire hose, in that you get all the transactions and all the balances, and I think what we will start to see is the smart companies, to get over the consent journey of asking a customer for access to their bank accounts, will only ask them for the minimal amount of data that they actually need. But I certainly think that that opportunity to keep your current account, or to keep your existing banking relationship where it is today, with a trusted, heavily regulated business, but yet get better informed decisions around where you get financial products from, and potentially get other products that cross into banking and even outside of banking. I think that's probably the really interesting part about open banking for me.
So I think there's definitely a link back to the question that we started with, which is kind of around the relevance of fintech outside of the fintech bubble. And I think here if we think about the way that people have traditionally engaged with banks, it's I guess it's been more or less a utility. It's something that you need to kind of do the things you otherwise wish to do in life. To what extent does the kind of the open data world that you envision in the future change that model of customer direct access with bank to then enable engagement with other providers and goods and services elsewhere? Does the financial services piece become rolled up in the places that customers want to be interacting and spending their time anyway?
Yeah, I would say that banking has always been one of those products and business models that's front and center. So you go and you shop for a mortgage or a credit card or a current account, and when you get spoken to from a bank, you're spoken to about a credit card or a mortgage, and often. A long time ago, you got to speak to a branch manager, and they would be able to talk to you about all of those things and understand the context of your entire life and your family's life, and that was. And then as we moved online, it became more channel, and as banks grew bigger and bigger and bigger, the person selling the credit card didn't know didn't work anywhere near the person selling the mortgage or the current account, and so it just became products on the shelf. And I think, unfortunately, that banking is one of those. It's one of those things. It's so important to everybody, but it's so intimidating, and it can make you feel insecure. And it's you go to buy a house, or it's not even about buying a house. You go to move into a new home, something that's really emotional. And the terrible part is having to go and shop for a mortgage and find out, are you going to get the mortgage? Are you not going to get the mortgage? And then when you make the transaction, you see this huge negative figure that you think, am I ever going to pay that off? So I think it's always got, whilst we really need those products, they're very intimate. What I think gets to happen in the future is I think actually banking gets to get infused into the overall experience. And we hear the story all the time about people don't want to they don't want to have a mortgage, they want to buy a house, and that's a start. But actually, the end of that sentence is they don't want to, they don't want to look for a mortgage. They want to buy a house from somebody they trust that is selling houses, and the question is that person who's selling houses also able to find ways to represent the bank and have partnerships and with brokers and digital providers that are able to make quick decisions for you on the spot? And so I think that concept of banking being infused into the overall transaction, as opposed to being such a big part of the transaction, is really where things get taken now.
2018 was supposed to be the year of open banking, at least in the UK, I guess in Europe. Was it?
I certainly think it was a big year for open banking. And I think it was a big year for people that really cared about open banking. It was certainly a big year for me because I helped. I was involved in starting a company that's really relevant because of this particular change. I think it was very relevant for the banks because they've had to do a lot of work internally. I think it was very relevant for the regulator. I think it was very relevant for the VC market because they were starting to see new interesting businesses pop up. I don't think it was relevant at all for the consumer. And in fact, I talk to people all day, every day about open banking, it seems, at the moment. And I don't often hear the consumer being spoken about, and you could argue that it's because it's so early and we're just it's only just happened and we're still in the infrastructure building phase. But actually, if you pair it back to not being specifically about banking and actually being about a customer's right to their own data and their ability to port that right to the people that they trust, their customer should be being spoken about from day one all the time, and we're all here for the customer. I think that there's lots of things that are going to evolve. I think 2018 was a great year because it was a very good year for the UK. I think the UK has done a fascinating. It's a fascinating case study of how you can actually mobilise a group of banks, even not banks, just a large group of incumbents to get mobilised. To get moving. I think I think it's been really interesting for the startup scene and the fintech scene in the UK, because they've had a lot of engagement. I think there's, as you would expect in the very early stage, there's lots of positive views, there's lots of negative views. I think 2019 will certainly play out to be much wider, and not just because of the fact that PSD2 comes online in September, but more because we'll be making inroads into APIs maturing, businesses being stood up, businesses getting funded, businesses getting regulated. So I think that's going to add to it. My personal opinion is that I think it'll be 2020 before we really see a customer-driven response to open banking.
So you're Australian, you mentioned, and I understand you still have ties, close ties to that country, and perhaps professionally as well. There's I suppose, similar, if broader regulation in Australia, effectively, but open banking laws there, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, kind of incorporate maybe some like utility providers also, effectively expand the reach compared to what has happened in Europe. Does that, I don't know, take things one step closer to this world of kind of open data sharing and new experiences that you're envisioning? And I don't know, maybe you want to talk a bit about the Australian model.
Yeah, I mean, Australia is obviously, it's very obviously close to my heart, because all my family are from there, and I've got a lot of friends in Australia. But I've looked really closely at Australia, because for that precise reason, that they looked at this and saw utilities providers, telecoms providers, and banks all being part of the same legislation, and they drove the legislation from the customer angle. It was the customer's data right. I think the thing that is also really interesting about Australia is that it's also going through a focus on its banks. There's a Royal Commission in Australia, so there is a question mark in the customer's mind as to, is my bank treating me the way that I should be treated? And so I think that actually is probably the thing that makes the environment different. It's different to here. We've in the UK, we've sort of gone through the bank bashing phase. Or maybe we'll never get totally through the bank bashing phase, but certainly the banks have kind of come back from the sort of dark days of 2008, 2009. I think because of that, I think what that means is that customers are going to be far more open to choice in Australia, and I think that will mean that there'll be lots of businesses that will be able to spin up and really kind of win the customer consent to help them. So I think that it will be very useful for the Australian startup scene, and it's why we've got a close eye. Obviously, we're a digital business, we're an API driven product, and so we will be able to enter the Australian market without having to set up an entire operation over there. The thing that I think will is one to watch is the Australian regulator, how active are they in helping startups, in helping the banks to manage, to get through deadlines, and effectively, also assisting in the customer, communication and messaging, so that customers understand what it is that's happening.
Can you, I don't know, you mentioned you thought it would be 2020 before we really started to see kind of customer-focused solutions being built on top of open banking. Can you, I don't know, envision some of those experiences, what they might look like, and maybe describe them for us? Yeah,
and I should probably clarify. I think if a customer never knows what open banking is, but actually uses lots of open banking products, then we probably succeeded. If they have to really know what open banking is, then there's probably something wrong. Because at the end of the day, it's really infrastructure, and it's the way in which data is passed. I think that I sort of mentioned it briefly earlier, was that I could see a mapping business that helps me to choose whether or not I should take an Uber or a black cab, or I should walk, or I should catch a bus. I could see a business that helps you to make those types of decisions, also helping you to understand what's the impact going to be on your transport budget, and is it better for you to take a number 10 bus instead of a black cab, because actually you've spent £250 already this month on black cabs. At the moment, that happens inside possibly a budgeting tool, possibly your bank also provides you something like that. But it tends to be an after the fact, post transaction. You learn, I've spent way too much on Ubers than I should have this month. I think that in transaction, sort of giving you that knowledge at that point, I think that's some things that I think would be very useful to customers. I think a lot of what we'll probably see is removing friction. So helping back office processing, things like being able to verify people's income, being able to verify, deeper affordability scores and soft credit checking and things like that, to remove, manual going down to the bank, printing out a bunch of statements or printing a bunch of statements at home and going to the bank and getting them stamped. I think that sort of stuff it's kind of the boring infrastructure things, but I think it will play out a little bit. And then I do think that it is going to be about, I think it's going to evolve then, and it's going to be, how are customers able to share their information with providers that is a combination of their banking information, potentially their health information, to get better insurance or to get more interesting travel products pushed to them. And I don't think it's going to be about advertising. I think it's going to be about a benefits-driven system where you will win my data if, one, you don't blast me with ads, but two, you personalize a service that is actually useful for me.
I guess this kind of brings us to the all-important junction between open banking and GDPR and really kind of structure around data ownership and sharing. I know you have views on kind of the more than the relevance of GDPR to this conversation, but it's effectively potentially another side of the same coin. Do you want to talk a bit about the role of GDPR in the immediate instance, but more broadly, structure around data ownership, processing, sharing, and what the implications are?
Yeah, I mean, I think GDPR is in some respects as relevant, if not more relevant, than account information service provider regulation. That regulation is important for the purposes of being able to understand who is in the ecosystem, but then what you do with that data when you get it, and how you access it, and then how you serve it to the customer, is a cross up of a large portion of GDPR, and then some of what's in the AISP or Accounts Information Service Provider regulation. So the thing for me is really more about, one, are we enabling companies to be able to do the right thing with data? Are we giving them the right information to be able to protect it, to store it, to process it in the right manner, to regulate against selling it on, and things like that? And then are we also helping to educate the customer so that they are fully aware that at any point in time it's their data and they can stop the transaction and they can ask for it to be handed back to them and removed from the provider who they were dealing with? So I think that it's still infrastructure, and that's why we're in the very, very early days of this stuff. GDPR only came in recently. So my sense is that, and that's why I say it's not a coincidence that open banking is coming in at the same time as we're wrestling with the next major wave of the way that the internet services and products are built. And it's, lots of people have said open banking will never happen in the US. And I think, and they've said that mainly because from a regulatory perspective, or maybe the question is, maybe it's more PSD2 will never happen in the US, but actually it regulation is there because customers want or need something, and I think fundamentally it all comes back to the customer, and I think it will be customer driven in all countries. Open banking is helpful for competition for sure, but at the same time it's also very helpful as it's such important data. Financial data is so important.
Well, open banking may never happen, PSD2 may never happen in the US, but Plaid just raised $250 million, and their business model is effectively, not dissimilar from open banking.
Absolutely.
Grabbing financial data and moving it around.
And being honest, that's probably the most exciting thing to happen. But the most exciting thing that I've seen for 2018 is Plaid coming in, is popping up. I mean, they've obviously been around for a long time. I've watched them for a while now. But that recent announcement, it's more because the deal that they've done with the large bank in the US is essentially to be accessing APIs, and so what that shows is that actually it was customer driven, and those APIs are being worked on by that bank, partnering with Plaid, when they weren't forced to do it by regulation and compliance. And I've heard lots of people talk about, well, open banking is just going through the compliance phase at the moment, and so banks are dragging their feet and they're just seeing it as compliance. That's probably true. But the bank in the US is not seeing it that way. They're seeing it as we need to be on the offensive here. We need to create this partnership. We need to create this ecosystem, and so that's super exciting because we all look at the US. We look at a lot of the technology evolution that happens from the US, and I think seeing that happened without the need for regulation just means that customers want it.
Yeah. Well, frankly, this kind of reinforces my view that open banking is really a godsend to the banking industry. Like as much as it felt initially like it put the banks at a competitive disadvantage. What used to be their kind of trove of customer data that only they had access to and could use for credit underwriting or decision making or whatever else, and now they have to share that with everyone, is really kind of forcing them to modernize and potentially stay relevant in a world of open data architectures and cross-platform customer experiences. It is absolutely 100% more of a strategic question. To open up is beneficial than to remain closed, and the fact that a U.S. bank and surely more to come are taking that same strategic decision is not surprising.
No, and I also think it's a really good it's a good point for the banks as well. I mean, everybody knows that banking technology is that they have a lot of legacy technology. They have a lot of processes that are inefficient because of technology stacks that they're still on through acquisitions, through long licenses and things like that. I think what open banking is actually doing, and the reason that one of the big reasons that we started Banked was because what this also gives the banks the opportunity to do is to operate in a world where the developer is playing a significant role, and the product builder is playing a significant role. And I think one of the things that banks have got to grapple with, as much as being able to expose their data, is also being able to understand how to serve a developer the right tools and documentation and processes that they need to build and ship products. And that's what Plaid have done really well. They've built a great developer ecosystem, and they've served them very well. And there's lots of other companies, Stripe and Twilio, we've seen that as well. And great products have come from being able to see those players in the mix. I have a view that I don't know that banks will be able to do that, and I think that's why companies like Banked, that's why there's a role for us to play. But I think it's an amazing market. It's a fascinating market because it just means that products can get shipped, in this digital, internet-driven world quickly. But if you can safely and effectively enable the developer to access components of what it is that you have to offer. And I think that's what I think the very smart banks, and certainly the digital the challenger banks, we see Starling and we've seen Monzo lead with APIs, and I think it's another big question that banks have got to tackle.
Mm-hmm. Brad, what's the best way for people to learn more about Banked and follow you guys' progress?
Yeah, so we're at banked.com. So that's our website. We're launching a product in the end of March 2019. We've got a closed user group at the moment. So if you want to reach out to us, please go to our website and all the links are on there. But yeah, it's we haven't said too much about our product yet because we want our product to do the talking. So it'll be a big Q1 for us next year.
Excellent. Brad Goodall, thank you very much for joining us today.
Really appreciate it, Will. Thanks very much.
Thanks for tuning into Rebank. If you like today's show, reach out. Follow us on Twitter at Rebank Podcast and join the conversation. For more on banking, fintech, and the future, check out our regular content at www.bankingthefuture.com.